What is good, everybody? It's your boy Dar Sora, and here we have the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker by Ray Carson that just came out. I'm super excited to share it with you guys. I'm going to be reading each chapter one by one and breaking them down, giving you my thoughts, and telling you what the book provides that the movie does not. So obviously this is chapter one, so I'm going to do a little brief explanation. So I got the expanded edition of the book from Barnes & Noble. It was like $20. Here's a side here, a little bit of back action. So there's like a poster in here and some other stuff that I'm not going to get into just because I'm really excited to share the actual novel with you guys. So we're going to get right into it with the famous words, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." Dun 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 dun. No, I'm just kidding. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. The dead speak. The galaxy has heard a mysterious broadcast, a threat of revenge in the sinister voice of the late Emperor Palpatine. General Leia Organa dispatches secret agents to gather intelligence, while Rey, the last hope of the Jedi, trains for battle against the diabolical First Order. Meanwhile, Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, that's my boy, rages in search of the Phantom Emperor, determined to destroy any threat to his power. So we're going to start with chapter 1, chapter uno, and I'm going to break it down at the end. So chapter 1. Rey sat cross-legged, eyes closed. She didn't remember rising off the ground, but she was vaguely aware that somehow she ended up floating. Pebbles and small boulders hovered around her like a field of asteroids orbiting their sun. The force flowed through her, bioed her, connected her to everything. The lush rainforest moon of Ajan Kloss was teeming with life. She could feel every tree and every fern, every reptile and insect. A few strides away in a hidden den, a small furry creature groomed its litter of 4 kits. "That's it, Rey," came Leia's voice, deep and soothing as always. "Very good. Your connection becomes stronger every day. Can you feel it?" "Yes," Rey said. "Now reach out. If your mind is ready, you'll be able to hear those who have come before." Rey inhaled through her nose and sent her awareness into the void. Peace and calm were key, Leia always said. She reached, she searched, she felt the breeze on her cheeks, she smelled loomy soil, damp from the recent rain. "Be with me, be with me, be with me," she muttered. But she heard nothing except winds in the trees and chirping insects. Rey didn't want to admit that she was failing, so instead she said, "Why did you stop training with Luke?" Her words came out too harsh, almost like a challenge. Leia took it in stride. "Another life called to me." Eyes still closed, Rey asked, "How did you know?" "A feeling, visions, of serving the galaxy in different ways." "But how did you know those visions were true?" Rey pressed. "I knew." She heard the smile in Leia's voice. Rey didn't understand how Leia could be so sure of anything. "I treasured each moment that I spent with my brother," Leia added. "The things he taught me. I use them every day. Once you touch the Force, it's a part of you. Always." Over the years, I continued to learn, to grow. There were times on the Senate floor when the meditations I practiced with Luke were the only things that kept me from causing a galactic incident. Now that is pretty hype. I really like that little tidbit they just added. Rey frowned. Leia didn't need patience. She could have made anyone do anything she wanted with the power of the Force. Surely she had been tempted. Was Luke angry when you quit? She hoped Leia would notice that she could talk and float at the same time now. That was progress, right? Leia paused to consider. He was disappointed, but he understood. I think he held out hope that I'd return to it someday. Rey almost laughed. He should have known better. Once Leia made a decision, it was for keeps. I gave him my lightsaber to convince him otherwise. Told him to pass it on to a promising student someday. But Leia's voice had grown tight. Rey sensed she was holding something back. "Where's your lightsaber now?" Rey said. "No idea. Now stop trying to distract me," Leia said. "Reach out." Rey refocused and emptied her mind of worries, just as Leia had taught her. She cast out her awareness, opened herself to anything the Force might want to tell her. Tentatively, she called to him. "Master Skywalker?" Nothing, nothing, and more nothing. Master Leia, I don't hear anyone. Let go of all thought. Let go of fear. Reach out. Invite the Jedi of the past to be with you. Be with me. Be with me. Rey waited all of 1 second, maybe 2. They're not with me. Rey made a noise of exasperation, then flipped herself neatly to land on the ground. Rocks toppled around her. Rey, Leia said. The general could put so much into a single word. Acceptance, amusement, fondness. Maybe that's why she becomes such a powerful leader. Be patient. I'm starting to think it's impossible to hear the voices of the Jedi who came before, Rey said, striding towards Leia. Her master always managed to look neat and tidy no matter how muddy their makeshift base got. Her hair was pulled back into a circlet of braids, and she wore a quilted vest over a brown tunic. All Duranian jewelry always dangled from her earlobes, wrapped her wrists and fingers. Alright, quick side note. Why are they flexing so hard? Why is Leia flexing right now in this book? Her eyes were bright and knowing, as always, but Rey has noticed that her movements had slowed recently, as though her bones ached. Leia's face held a hint of a smile. Nothing's impossible. Rey grabbed her blast helmet and leapt to her feet. Nothing's impossible, she echoed, trying to believe it. I'm gonna run the training course. That I can do. Rey needed to run, or maybe to hit something. Now I just want to put another side note. Maybe needing to hit something, I feel like that's very uncharacteristic. And I think that's kind of foreshadowing some stuff. Leia handed her Luke's lightsaber. Rey took it reverently. Then she dashed into the jungle, BB-8 rolling after her. Leia watched Rey sprint away, a hint of a smile on her lips. Training the girl always filled her with pride, but also misgiving. Rey was both a wonderful and an exasperating student. Frustrated with anything she didn't pick up quickly, completely unaware of how fast she did pick up things. She wasn't one to judge though. Leia had exasperated Luke just as much. Besides, there was something about growing old that made her connection with the Force even stronger. When the body began to fail, the mind reached out, unencumbered by physical ability. The truth was, Leia couldn't run through the jungle even if she wanted to. Peace and calm came easily because her body craved them. Then again, perhaps Leia had never been young. By the time she reached the age Rey was now, she was already leading a rebellion. Rey could be a great leader someday, and she would be if Leia had anything to do with it. The girl had darkness inside of her, just like Ben, but Leia would not make the same mistakes she had made with her son. She would not give in to fear, neither of the darkness rising within her pupil, nor of her own questionable qualifications as a teacher. More important, she would never send Rey away. Leia turned and began walking back toward the base. She reached out her hand and let her fingers trail through the ferns and broad-leaf creepers that lined her path. Agent Kloss held so many good memories. Years ago, she trained here with Luke, who had declared it nice Dagobah. I like that. He claimed it was as wet, warm, green, and overflowing with life as the planet where he trained with Yoda, except it didn't smell bad. Maybe Yoda was stinking that planet up, who knows? She stepped into a clearing. To her right, a large tree with a massive trunk reached for sunlight, spreading a canopy of branches that shaded the clearing, keeping anything else from growing except ground-creeping ferns and low, sparse grass. Leia had trained right here, in this very spot. She reached out and touched the tree trunk reverently. A large bowl of bark had formed around an old wound. It was almost sealed shut. Leia had been one to damage the tree. She swung for Luke with her lightsaber and missed, slashing into the tree trunk instead. The tree had been healing itself for more than 2 decades. Oh, Luke, I hope I'm doing this right, she thought. Leia was no Jedi Master, but she had learned from the best. And not just from Luke. Over the years, she occasionally heard the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi through the Force, and even more rarely, that of Yoda. Yo, that's hype. Some days, it felt as though she learned from the Force itself. She was first and foremost a politician and a general, but she had accepted her Jedi legacy and embraced it the best she could. And maybe that's exactly what Rey needed, the training in the Force from not a formal master, but rather someone grounded in the everyday minute of life and survival. Obi-Wan had failed to keep Vader from the dark side. Luke had failed the same way with Ben. She could not fail Rey. Insects sang as she walked, birds warbled overhead, and tiny amphibians trilled their mating calls. Odd how such a rapturous place could be so peaceful. The noise was so loud, so ever-present, and so soothing, it was almost as perfect as silence. Many years ago, not long before the Battle of Endor, she discovered the meditative power of sound. She and Luke had stolen away from some training, and she somehow ended up standing on her hands while Luke slung good-natured taunts her way. Even with the help from the Force, her shoulders had started to burn. Her arms wobbled. They had already spent the last hour sparring with their lightsabers, and her body was exhausted. You know, Luke had said, his voice smug, when I did this on Dagobah, Yoda was standing on my feet. He said that a lot back then. When I did this on Dagobah, it was obnoxious and completely unhelpful, so Leia reminded him, "You're being obnoxious and completely unhelpful. I also did it on one hand," he added. He was trying to provoke her, to teach her a lesson about anger and impatience and all that nonsense. Luke had forgotten that his student was a superb strategist who already benefited from a royal education. Leia would not be provoked. Instead, she considered. She reached out to the Force, let it flow through her like blood in her veins. A tiny insect began rubbing its mandibles together, whistling a sweet high song. Some instinct guided her, and Leia focused on the sound. It was beautiful, pure, ethereal, and completely untethered to the worries of leadership and teaching, failure and learning. With focus and with delight, Leia raised herself off the ground. She floated upside down, feet pointed to the sky. After a moment, she lifted her arms and held them parallel to the ground. But she was just a student, new to the ways of the Force, and when she came back to herself, fully realized what she had done, she whipped her hands back down lest she fall. She did it just in time. Her form collapsed, and she found herself kneeling in mud. No matter, she'd do better next time. Leia looked up to find Luke staring at her, mouth wide open. "Did you ever do that with Yoda?" She couldn't resist asking. He shook his head wordlessly. "I can do better," she insisted. "Float longer." Luke found his voice. "You're going to make me a better teacher," he said. Not the response she expected. "What do you mean?" He reached down, helped her up. "Your footwork is terrible," he said. "Don't get me wrong, your lightsaber craft is coming along. But you do other things, naturally." His face turned apologetic. "What I mean is you're exceptional. Just different." Then he had smiled, with that wide farm boy grin that stayed with him all the way up until the night of Ben's betrayal. Leia shook off the memory with effort. Memories were coming fast and vivid these days. She was glad for this one, though. It would be the key to training Rey. Leia and Rey were different, the last remnants of a dead order, and together they would carve a new path. Thick green foliage whipped past Rey as she ran, the flag in her hand flashing red with each pump of her arms. She bounded over tangled ferns, dodged hanging vines. Sweat soaked her collar, and her thighs burned with effort. Even so, running through the jungle was not harder than running ankle-deep in desert sand. She could do this all day. Rey had taken out the first two training remotes and captured the flags they guarded. She leapt in a massive gorge, fought blindly over a vine while balanced on a tightrope made of vines, traversed a thin ridge high above the jungle canopy. Now the course had her doubling back, where she encountered BB-8. He warbled at her. "One to go," she said. "Come on." The final remote eluded her because it was faster, trickier, more droid than remote. She told Leia she wanted a challenge today, and Leia had delivered. BB-8 sped after her, beeping complaints every time he had to dodge a tree root. Rey hid a smile. She was continually impressed by how well the little droid kept up with her, whether they were running in the sands of Jakku, the rocky trails of Takodana, or the jungles of Anjan Kloss. His maneuverability made him the perfect training companion. He bleeped a warning. "I see it, BB-8." She slid to a halt. The spherical remote had stopped and now hovered midair as if waiting for her, or maybe taunting her. It was different from the other two she had taken out, a wicked red shell surrounding shining metal firing ports. It hummed dark and low. She felt that hum deep in her chest. Rey unhooked Luke's reforged lightsaber from her utility belt, ignited it. Blush light glowed against the leaves around her as she stared the remote down. She was going to destroy this thing. Suddenly, a blast shot out from one of the ports. Stinging pain exploded in her upper arm. Rey resisted the urge to clutch her arm or even grunt in pain. She deserved it after all. She hadn't been ready. Determination is not the same as readiness, Leia would always say. Well, she wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. The next time it fired, she whipped up her lightsaber to deflect the blast and sent it flying into the trees. She didn't even have a chance to congratulate herself before another blast hit her in the chest. Of course, multiple ports meant multiple blasts. She had to focus. She breathed deep through her nose, reached out to the Force. The training remote started to buzz around her, flashing angry red as it slung slinging darts in a disarraying array. And she let instinct take over, and she whirled her lightsaber with equally dizzying speed, deflecting every single attack. Connecting to the Force came easy these days. So easily it was like breathing. But the peace, the calm that Leia was always going on about eluded her. So even though she could counter the remote's every move, she couldn't find an opening for her attack. Patience, she imagined Leia saying. Wait for your moment. The remote was behind her, then in front of her, then high above her head, darting through the air like a buzzing fly. If she could just smash it, Now I just want to note, that's the second time Rey has been very aggressive, kind of showing like the anger that she's letting out and she can't control. I think it's very interesting how they're foreshadowing this and kind of going way more in depth than the movie did. The remote sped away and she tore after it. It stopped again, fired a few bolts to goad her. Teeth gritted, she swung her lightsaber. The remote dodged, and her blade missed, slicing through a tree trunk. Sparks and leaves and bark splinters rained down as the tree toppled, smashing jungle foliage on its way down. She leapt over the downed trunk after the remote, swung again. The remote swooped around as if anticipating the arc of her blade, barely evading when the lightsaber slid through another tree as if it were made from butter. The roiling dark cloud of frustration grew inside of her. She hardly realized what she was doing as raw instinct took over. Rey threw her lightsaber, winging it like a propeller through the air at the red remote. It dodged, and the lightsaber sliced yet through another tree. The remote screamed as it dived for her head, but this time she was ready. She reached with the Force for a downed branch. It flew to her hand. She anticipated the exact angle of attack, and she whipped up the branch and thrust it into the remote, spearing it against a nearby tree trunk. Her lightsaber returned to her hand with a satisfying smack. The crushed red remote twitched and sparked against the tree. She glared at it as triumph filled her. Maybe patience was overrated. Whispers filled her ear. No, her very mind. She swirled, seeking their source, even as the realization dawned. It was happening again. The jungle around her faded. All went deathly silent as sweltering darkness closed in, threatening to smother her. An image sprang to her mind, and she flinched away, though there was no avoiding the horrible sight. Kylo Ren, black-clad and ferocious, his crackling red lightsaber slicing mercilessly through robed figures. She heard their screams, smelled their blood, watched as they tried in vain to flee or beg for their lives. Nothing slowed him. He was a juggernaut of destruction, monstrous and unstoppable. Relief flooded her like a wave when the vision shifted, but it quickly changed to utter desolation as she saw herself, wind-whipped and alone, standing in a forsaken landscape of endlessly fractured ground. The hair on her arms stood on end, for the air crackled with electricity. Before her, a massive monolith jutted upward, scraping the sky. It was black and shimmery, casting a huge shadow. The monolith shifted, became a giant face of stone, cloaked in evil. No, not a stone at all. A form of something, part human, part machine, with tubes stretching away from it like tentacles, all filled with a strange liquid. What was this creature? Was it alive, or was it... Flashes of Luke's face, then Kylo's. Han Solo, his hand against Kylo's cheek, a young woman in a hood, a freighter flying away from Jakku. Finally, a burning voice in her head, as clear and unbearable as a desert sun. Exegol. So she's actually having contact or some type of vision of Palpatine already. That was definitely not in the movie. She whispered the word back, her voice shaking. Exegol. And she suddenly was standing before yet another giant stone structure, this one shaped like a huge claw, its thick bent fingers grasping ever upward. Her legs twitched as if it to flee, even as something about it beckoned to her, invited her. She found herself wanting to approach the massive claw thing, wanting to know what it would be like to run her fingers along its rough black surface. The black claw thing was a throne. She could see it now. She took a step forward, but something beeped at her, and she hesitated. The beeping continued, grew more insistent. Clarity hit her like a quarterstaff to the jaw. Of course she couldn't touch that throne. It belonged to darkness and evil. She had already chosen a different path, hadn't she? Now she's questioning herself. More beeping. Something appeared on the throne, a familiar figure. Rey blinked in shock and dismay. Quick as it appeared, the vision evaporated like the morning mist, and she was left gasping in the jungle. Rey was so relieved to sense the life and light and humid green around her that it took her a moment to fully come back to herself, to trace the sound of beeping to a felled tree, and beneath it, a very indignant BB-8. Poor BB-8. She dashed over to him, pushed some branches away. "I'm so sorry," she said. He babbled at her while she extracted him from the fallen trunk. It took a little help from the Force to free him completely. One of the orange discs that protected his modular tool bay had popped off, exposing a dark channel to his motive system. She heard her friend. Poe was going to be livid with her, but not more livid than she was with herself. The little droid warbled at her. "Yes, BB-8, it happened to me again." He whirled at her, part question, part empathy. "No, I still don't know what the Force was trying to show me, but this time, it was worse." Some of the flashes had been memories, and hers, and Kylo Ren's. Let's get back. Maybe she should tell Leia what happened, or maybe not. The General had enough things to worry about, and Rey needed Leia to believe her, to trust in her. What would the General say if she knew how Rey's frustration and anger were triggering visions of death and dark power? She needed more training, more time meditating in the Force, more time seeking the peace that Leia was trying to teach her. She could do it. She had to. If only she could hear the voices through the Force, like Leia could. Surely Luke could provide some guidance. As Rey and BB-8 neared the camp, she decided to try again. "Nothing's impossible," Leia had said. "Master Luke," she said, "I'm afraid." Rey glanced around, making sure only BB-8 was there to observe her speaking to no one. Rey reached out to the Force and said, "Before, I felt it. You saw it. I'm drawn to the dark side, or maybe it's drawn to me. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's stronger now, and I can't push it away, as hard as I try. I don't understand." BB-8 beeped. "Shh, don't interrupt me. Master Luke, can you hear me? I need your..." BB-8 beeped again, more insistently. They had reached the edge of the camp. "Seriously, you're going to be annoying. Go over there," Rey said, indicating a large flight case. He did as she asked, but he warbled his indignation. "It is how it works," Rey countered. "There are 4 spirits. Luke wrote about them in the Jedi text. They come when you need them the most." The droid remained loudly skeptical. Rey ignored him. "Master Luke," she tried again. "I have visions of things that frighten me. I don't want to lose this. Leia is how I dreamed a mother would be, and my friends. I don't want to let them down." There it was, her greatest fear. That these people that she'd come to care so much for would be disappointed in her, maybe even hurt by her. She'd been alone for so long, she couldn't bear the thought of losing any of them. But no one here understands, except Kylo Ren. If the son of Han and Leia can be turned, can't any of us? A twig cracked, and Rey looked up. Snap Wexley and Rose were walking towards her, questions writ all over their face. "How much of that did you hear?" Rey said. "Of what?" Snap said, failing to look innocent. "Nothing," Rey mumbled. Rose's expression softened with empathy. The commander of the engineering corps had a disarming quality about her. Whenever she spoke to Rey, It was all Rey could do to keep from spilling all her fears and worry to her friend. You okay? Rose asked. Yes, of course. I was just doing Jedi stuff, Rose finished for her. Yes. Thankfully, Rose chose not to press her. She said, the general has asked for you. Rey took a deep breath. It was decision time. Should she tell Leia about her dark vision or keep it to herself? Now, I know I messed up a few words at the end, but had to stay, strong and trucking on. And I really like chapter 1, and I want to break down a few things. So the big thing to me was Leia going through her training. She was still very new to the Force, and she was already showing signs of being stronger in the Force at a much younger stage than Luke was. So kind of hinting that Leia potentially is more Force sensitive than even Luke, which I think is really cool. Both of them being twins and being the son and daughter of Anakin Skywalker. You obviously know that Leia definitely has some of that juice in her, but I don't think many people expected to be more than Luke. So that was really awesome. And then just seeing them kind of, bicker and try and one-up each other and kind of talk some smack was really cool. And finding out that, obviously Luke trained her, but she had voices of Obi-Wan and Yoda talk to her and show her things in the Force, I think is also really amazing. And then I really like how this first chapter, you kind of see Rey really being tempted by the dark side and seeing all these visions of Kylo and then Palpatine and her not really being able to control it. And she's trying to fight it, but she can't. And she tries to speak out to Luke, which she did not do in the movie. And the one thing I really like too as well, after seeing how Force sensitive and strong with the Force that Leia is, and how Luke tried to, provoke her, and she stayed strong and she stayed true and she wasn't going to let that, bother her. And it showed how strong and dedicated and devoted she was to her training and the Force and to the light. That anytime Rey is in a rut or she's feeling, the dark try and consume her, she always has one of Leia's sayings or something Leia did, in the back of her head, steering her away from the dark or at least trying to mask it. And I thought that was really cool because you don't really see that in the movie as well. So that's the end of chapter 1. And I know this is a long video. All these are going to be pretty long. The chapters are each like 10 to 12 pages. So it's a couple minutes, probably like 2 minutes a page reading and then kind of breaking it down. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have not got the book, I recommend it heavily. And we'll be back with chapter 2 very soon. Thanks for tuning in. It's your boy Dar Sora. And may the Force be with you. I'll see you guys.